Merle Tibbetts had been going to farm auctions in Daviess County, Indiana, for the better part of 50 years, mostly to look rather than to bid, and he said afterward he didn't realize he was watching anything worth remembering until the bidding on the Combine row was almost over. He'd come that Saturday for a set of socket wrenches he never did end up buying, having gotten distracted, same as most of the crowd eventually did, by something else entirely. What he left with instead was a story he's told at least once a week ever since, usually starting the same way, that he didn't think much of it at first. A woman he half recognized standing near the back of the crowd with a notepad and a tape measure. Not saying a word while 15 rusted-out combines sat waiting their turn in a row along the fence line. The auctioneer's son, a heavy-set man everybody in 3 counties called Caterpillar, on account of the dozer he'd run for a land-clearing outfit before he ever sold a piece of used equipment, stood near the front with his arms crossed, already counting the 2 machines in that row he actually wanted. He had no particular reason that morning to think the other 13 mattered to anybody. By early afternoon, he wasn't saying much of anything at all. Most people who watch stories like this scroll past without ever subscribing. But if you've ever been underestimated, talked over, or dismissed because of how you looked standing in a crowd, stay with us. Subscribe. This one is for you. The auction was held the second Saturday of September 2024 on the Tisdale Place outside Washington, Indiana, the county seat, after Orville Tisdale died that spring at 86 and left behind, among other things, a row of combines he'd been collecting and half-fixing and never quite getting around to selling for the better part of 40 years. The day came in hot and dusty, the kind of late summer heat that makes gravel lots shimmer a little by 10 in the morning, and the crowd ran heavier than most equipment sales in that part of the county, partly because word had gotten around about the Combine row, and partly because Daviess County draws a different sort of crowd to begin with. A half-dozen black buggies sat parked along the fence at the far end of the lot, the horses tied loose in whatever shade the machine shed offered. Because Daviess County has one of the larger Amish settlements in the state. And an equipment auction this size pulled buyers from both worlds without anybody finding that the slightest bit unusual. Carl Pickens, a retired postal carrier who delivered mail down that same road for 26 years and showed up to nearly every estate sale within driving distance, whether he meant to buy anything or not, stood near the registration table most of the morning trading weather talk with anybody who'd stand still long enough to hear it. He never did bid on anything that day. He just liked watching a good crowd work. Orville Tisdale's 2 sons lived out of state, neither one of them with much interest in farming or in spending another month sorting through their father's machine shed before the snow came. The estate attorney had recommended bundling the Combine row as a single lot precisely because nobody expected it to draw a serious fight. A quick, clean number that would let the family close the estate out before the holidays, instead of dragging the process into spring. It was, by every reasonable measure available to the people making that decision, the sensible choice. Nobody involved in making it had any way of knowing what 4 of those 15 machines were actually worth to the right buyer. 15 combines sat in a single row along the back fence, none of them running, most of them rusted through somewhere visible, headers detached and leaned against trees, a couple with tires gone flat and sunk into the dirt so long that grass had grown up through the rims. One had a wasp nest the size of a basketball built into the cab where a side window used to be. Another still had a faded feed store calendar taped inside the cab door, the month frozen on some August from a decade nobody could quite agree on. The Tisdale family hadn't wanted to itemize them out individually, 15 separate auction lots being 15 separate headaches for an estate everybody wanted closed out before winter. So the auctioneer announced early that the whole row would go as a single money bid. 1 number, 1 buyer. The entire lot, or nothing. Janelle Vickers stood near the back with a notepad and a tape measure and didn't say much to anybody for the better part of an hour. She was 43, ran a small combine parts and rebuild operation out of a pole barn on 22 acres outside Odon, and had been walking that fence line of machines since the gates opened at 8 that morning. Climbing up into cabs, checking serial number tags riveted to the frames, running her hand along separator housings the way another woman might check a quilt for the maker's stitch. She checked the tags. She checked the cab wiring, or the lack of it. She checked the engine bays for the telltale square module box that meant a machine had been built after the manufacturers started wiring everything through computers, and on 4 of the 15, that box simply wasn't there to find. Engines clean under all that rust, she told herself, standing at the 4th machine, dropping the article the way she always did when nobody else was close enough to hear how she talked to herself. Most of the men standing around the coffee truck figured, if they thought about her at all, that she was there for parts same as anybody, maybe looking to scavenge a hydraulic pump or two off whatever didn't sell. What she'd actually found by the time the auctioneer called the combine row up around 1 o'clock was that 4 of those 15 machines weren't scrap at all. A 1979 International Harvester 1460, a 1981 Massey Ferguson 410, a 1983 Gleaner K2, a 1978 John Deere 6610. Every one of them mechanically sound under the rust. And every one of them built in the years before combine manufacturers started wiring engine and header controls through onboard computer modules that, once they failed 30 or 40 years later, simply couldn't be replaced at any price. Because nobody made the part anymore. And nobody ever would again. She'd checked the date stamps on the data plates twice each, once with her own eyes, and once running her thumb over the raised lettering the way a person checks a coin for wear. Because a misread digit on a stamped plate could turn a $4,000 machine into a worthless one in either direction. And she had no intention of finding that out the hard way in front of a crowd. She'd learned to look for machines like that from her father, Russell Vickers, who'd run a salvage yard outside Odon for almost 30 years before his knees gave out and he handed the business down to her in pieces over the better part of a decade. He never had much patience for combines built after the mid-1980s, not because he disliked computers exactly, but because he'd watched too many farmers get stranded mid-harvest by a single failed sensor module that cost more to replace than the rest of the repair combined, if a replacement could even be found. She remembered riding along with him to a sale outside Petersburg when she was maybe 16, watching him walk straight past a row of shiny, newer machines without so much as a glance, headed instead for a single beat-up combine sitting alone at the end of the lot. Because he'd already heard from somebody at the coffee stand exactly what year it was built and exactly why that year mattered. Pre-electronic equipment, he used to say, was honest. A man with the right wrenches could fix anything on it himself, and that kind of honesty had a market all its own, especially among buyers who valued it for reasons that went well beyond the price of parts. That market, in Daviess County and the counties around it, ran heaviest through the Amish and Old Order Mennonite farms scattered across the area. Families who preferred machines simple enough to maintain entirely by hand, without a single circuit board standing between a broken part and a working harvest. A combine like the Gleaner K2 sitting in that row, ugly and rust-streaked as it looked, was worth more to a buyer like that than most newer machines worth 4 times the sticker price, precisely because it had nothing in it that couldn't be fixed with hand tools and a little patience. It was a little like the way some people still hunt down an old manual typewriter over a computer. Not out of nostalgia exactly, but because a typewriter never crashes, never needs an update, and never goes dark in the middle of a sentence for reasons nobody can explain. A combine without a single computer module in it worked the same way. It either ran or it didn't, and if it didn't, A man with the right wrenches could usually say why within the hour. It wasn't a niche Janelle had stumbled into by accident. Exactly. Though she'd tell you straight she hadn't fully understood how steady it was until the 3rd or 4th year of running the business on her own. She'd assumed, at first, that demand like that would dry up eventually, the supply of old machines running out faster than buyers could be found. It hadn't worked out that way at all. If anything, the supply kept shrinking faster than the demand did, which was most of why a row of 15 rusted combines sold as one lot at a single estate sale was worth far more, taken apart, than anybody standing in that gravel lot that morning had bothered to calculate. Caterpillar wanted 2 specific units out of that row, both newer, both still showing some resale value to the kind of commercial customer he usually dealt with, and as far as he was concerned the other 13 were exactly what they looked like. Rust, weeds, and scrap iron nobody serious would fight over. He'd been buying and flipping equipment in that county for over 20 years and had never once sold a combine to a buggy-driving customer. Not because he had anything against it, but because that whole side of the market had simply never crossed his desk. The bidding opened at $200 for the entire row, the auctioneer's chant settling into the loose. Unhurried rhythm auctioneers use on lots they don't expect a real fight over. Caterpillar bid first, almost out of habit more than hunger, $250. Janelle raised it to $300 without lifting her hand more than a few inches off her hip. He went to $400. She went to $450. Somebody near the coffee truck laughed, not unkindly, and said something about a woman fixing to buy herself a scrapyard. Caterpillar didn't laugh along with him. He just glanced over at Janelle, the way a man glances at somebody he's starting to suspect knows something he doesn't, and bid $600. She didn't hesitate. $700. He held a long beat. He looked down the row at the 2 machines he actually wanted. He did some private arithmetic nobody else could see, the kind of arithmetic that only ever happens behind a man's eyes, and decided the other 13 weren't worth fighting that hard over no matter who was buying them. He let it go at $750. $800, Janelle said. Nobody else raised a hand. The auctioneer called it once, twice, 3 times, and brought the hammer down at $900 for all 15 combines, the whole row. 1 bid, 1 buyer. $60 a machine, somebody behind her said, loud enough to carry, and a few people laughed again. Caterpillar didn't. He stood with his arms still crossed, looking down that fence line like a man recounting something in his head that wasn't adding up the way he expected it to. He walked over while the clerk was writing up her ticket and said, not unkindly, that she'd paid $60 apiece for 14 rust buckets and 1 decent machine, and hoped she liked cutting herself on old metal. She told him she appreciated the concern. She didn't say anything else, and he didn't ask. It took her crew 3 weekends to haul all 15 combines back to the pole barn outside Odon, a flatbed trailer behind her Chevy Silverado, making the same 9-mile trip over and over, the gravel road dust hanging in the air long enough each time that the neighbors started joking about whether she'd bought a junkyard or started one. The first night, after the last load came in after dark, she walked the row again with a flashlight, same as she had at the Tisdale place, and lined the 4 good machines off to one side of the barn, away from the others, the way a person separates the keepers from everything else before the sorting even properly starts. The 11 true junkers got stripped down over the following 2 months. Engines and hydraulic pumps and separator parts sold off piece by piece to small dealers and repair shops across 3 counties, bringing in close to $9,800 total, more than the entire lot had cost to begin with, before she'd touched a single one of the 4 good machines. The International 1460 sold first, to a custom cutting crew run by an Amish family near Montgomery, for $7,600 cash. the buyer walking the whole machine over twice with his own hands before agreeing to the price. The same unhurried way Janelle had walked it herself back at the Tisdale place. He asked her only one question the whole visit, whether she'd touched the wiring harness at all beyond cleaning it. She told him no. Original harness, original everything. And he nodded once, like that single fact had settled something he'd already mostly decided anyway. The Massey Ferguson went next, $6,200, to a farm 2 counties over. A deal closed over coffee at the buyer's kitchen table rather than any lot or sale yard. The John Deere 6620 sold for $5,950 a few weeks after that, to a young farmer just starting out who'd been calling every parts dealer in 4 counties looking for exactly that model. The Gleaner K2 took the longest to place, mostly because she wanted it cleaned up right before she let it go, repainting the header and replacing 2 hoses that had gone brittle with age, work that cost her most of a weekend and a tank of degreaser. When it finally sold in November, it went for $8,400, the highest single number of the 4, to a buyer who didn't haggle over the price at all once he'd had a chance to look the machine over himself. He asked her, almost as an afterthought while writing the check, how she'd known to buy 15 combines just to get the 4 worth having. She told him she hadn't known for certain, not the way he meant it. She just looked close enough to find out. Add it together, and the 4 good machines alone brought in $28,150. Add the parts money from the other 11, and the total came to just under $38,000, against a $900 purchase and roughly $2,400 in cleanup, fuel, and the few replacement parts she'd bought to finish 2 of the rebuilds. Call it $35,000 clear, give or take, off a single afternoon's bidding that most of the crowd standing around that morning figured was a waste of a perfectly good $900. Janelle never did think of it as a gamble, not the way some of the men at that auction clearly believed it was. A gamble was buying something hoping the math worked out. What she'd done, by her own account, was closer to checking the math first and bidding only once she already knew the answer. Word travels through a county that size, whether anybody means for it to or not. Caterpillar heard about the Gleaner sale from a customer of his own, a man who mentioned it in passing while paying for a hydraulic hose, not realizing he was handing Caterpillar a number that didn't sit right next to the $2,400 he'd gotten for a comparable K2 he'd flipped to another dealer that same fall. He didn't say anything back to the customer. He just wrote out the receipt, quiet, and didn't bring the Tisdale auction up again for a long while after that. He wasn't a fool, exactly, and nobody who knew him would call him careless either. He'd simply spent 20 years selling into one market and never once looked sideways at the one sitting right next to it. The whole time, in plain sight, parked along a fence in black buggies he passed without much thought on his way into work most mornings. Some men go quiet when they're embarrassed. Caterpillar went quiet, Merle Tibbet says, because he was doing math in his head he hadn't thought to do before, and he didn't much care for what it added up to. Janelle Vickers is 44 this fall. She still runs the same pole barn outside Odon, still walks fence lines at estate auctions with a notepad and a tape measure and a serial number list folded into her back pocket. And she's bought 2 more full combine lots since the Tisdale sale, both times for close to scrap money, both times with nobody bidding hard against her. Word among the Amish and Mennonite families she sells to has started carrying her name specifically now, rather than just the name of whatever shop she happens to be working out of. The kind of reputation that takes years to build and disappears the first time a buyer feels misled about what he's getting. She doesn't talk about the numbers much outside her own family, mostly because she'd rather keep walking those fence lines without a crowd watching too closely what she's actually looking for. Her father, Russell still comes out most weekends to look over whatever she's brought home, running his hand along a separator housing the same way he taught her to 30 years ago, and he honestly couldn't tell you, if you asked him straight, which of the two of them taught the other more by now. She is, by her father's own account, better at spotting the good ones under the rust than he ever was, though he'll only admit that much after his second cup of coffee. Merle Tibbetts still tells it the same way every time, standing near that same fence where the row of 15 combines used to sit. Mostly empty pasture now, except for a single rusted header nobody ever hauled off. He says the crowd wasn't cruel that day, just looking at the same row of rust everybody else was looking at, and seeing exactly what it appeared to be instead of what it actually was. He says a man can spend 20 years getting good at reading one kind of customer and never once notice the other kind standing quiet at the edge of the lot the whole time, reins in hand, waiting his turn same as anybody. Caterpillar still runs his lot in town, still does fine for himself, and still hasn't sold a combine to a buggy-driving customer, though Merle says he's heard the man started asking around lately about who handles that side of things. Some people get mocked for what they don't know. Every so often, somebody gets mocked for knowing something nobody else in that gravel lot had bothered to ask about.